They got to stop being so obsessed with Israel and so obsessed with the Jews. You know, it's not the Israelis that are going to have another 9/11 here in our country.
No. Hang on a sec. We need regime change in Jerusalem, and we need it tonight.
I tweeted to Ben Shapiro. I said, you know, I've never seen anything on the Daily Wire that's actually critical of Israel. And he quote tweets me. And at this time, I have 1,000 followers on Twitter. I don't know, I probably got 100 likes on this tweet. It wasn't a viral tweet. He quote tweets me and says, to accuse a Jew of dual loyalty is the surest sign of anti-Semitism.
But the second you're like, well, actually, it's the Jews. First of all, it's against my Christian faith. Like, I just don't believe that, and I never will, period. And second, then it becomes a way to discredit. That's when I was like, this guy's a Fed.
Amid all this Israel derangement syndrome that we're seeing from many people on the right, they got to stop being so obsessed with Israel and so obsessed with the Jews. You know, it's not the Israelis that are going to have another 9/11 here in our country.
No. Hang on a second.
Not obsessed with the Jews. Am obsessed with the country that is sucking up our resources to commit atrocities and slaughter innocent people in the Middle East. And I'm not going to stop talking about it just because the likes of Laura Loomer accuse people like us of being obsessed. Yeah, I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed with the country that's destroying our country. Go ahead, Cenk.
Yeah, so Stephen Miller is about to defend us. What? Okay, so things have taken a turn.
Stephen Bannon.
I'm sorry, Stephen Bannon, Stephen Miller, never.
Yeah.
But you know, that goes to the point I was gonna make, Anna, which is that of all the people I give credit for turning around, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tucker Carlson, etc., it's so hard to give Steve Bannon credit.
Don't give him credit.
Okay, so let's watch together and make the decision together.
The guy who's talking about Trump doing a third term, that guy?
No, I know, I'm perfectly aware.
Yeah. How's Curtis Yarvin doing?
Yeah.
How's that corporate monarchy plot working out?
That's what
I don't trust him at all. I don't trust Bannon at all. Anyway, with that in mind, so this discussion began when Loomer claimed that the Trump administration is being manipulated by the government of Qatar.
Yeah.
Hilarious. Here's the clip.
I think it's important, Steve, for people to remember that we could have had the hostages out. We could have had the hostages out 2 years ago, but it was the Qataris that were providing safe haven to the leaders of Hamas so that they weren't killed by the IDF. Are those our allies? Where are the dead bodies of the American hostages that we were told that were going to be turned over weeks ago when this peace deal was finalized? Where are the bodies? We don't have the bodies yet. Qatar controls Hamas at the end of the day. They do. So I think that we need to have a real conversation, Steve, in the GOP, and hopefully, you know, amid all this Israel derangement syndrome that we're seeing from many people on the right, you know, you don't see these people ever talk about Islam. You don't ever see these people talk about the threat of Islam, Steve. And they got to stop being so obsessed with Israel and so obsessed with the Jews. You know, it's not the Israelis that are going to have another 9/11 here in our country.
No. Hang on a second.
I'm worried about the threat of Zionism that has cost this country, I mean, when it comes to funneling our resources to Israel, at least $300 billion. We've definitely lost soldiers fighting Israel's wars. I mean, how many Muslim countries did we do that for?
Look, the entire global war on terror cost us $8 trillion, and 90% of it was to fight Israel's enemies.
And by the way, I was told by the likes of Laura Loomer that I should be very concerned about Muslim terrorists, you know, like Al-Qaeda, for instance. Al-Qaeda carried out 9/11, so valid point, except now, at the behest of Israel, we're very supportive of the new Al-Qaeda terrorist leader of Syria. So when it comes to Israel's preferred Muslim terrorists, we'll be real friendly, even if those terrorists were part of the group that carried out the worst terror attack in US soil, in US history.
Netanyahu created Hamas because he wanted to split the Palestinians. And so he thought if they're divided, we'll get to say we have no partner for peace. And it'll be a good way of continuing to take more Palestinian land. Now he pretends that he's outraged by Hamas. So why did you help them?
Fund them?
Why did you help fund them? I mean, look, the Israelis, I mean, they should be furious with Netanyahu, but I'm looking forward to Bannon's defense here.
All right, let's go to the next video.
If Netanyahu and if the Israeli government had dealt straight with us, you wouldn't have had this problem. They're liars. They've been stone cold liars. They gave bad information. So I'm not going to let that go unchallenged. That's just bullshit. Netanyahu's government has been atrocious, and we should have regime change in Jerusalem, and we should have it immediately. They've lied to the American government. They've lied to the American people consistently. You say Israeli derangement syndrome. It's not Israeli derangement syndrome. I certainly don't have it. What I have is the Greater Israel Project that was never done. No due diligence was done. The American people never signed off that. The Trump administration never signed off on that. That's a Netanyahu. We need regime change in Jerusalem, and we need it tonight. Okay? Everything that comes out of Netanyahu's government is a stone cold lie.
I happen to disagree with both of them entirely. No, it's not a regime issue in Israel. This is the identity of that country. The Greater Israel Project has been pursued, whether Netanyahu's in charge or some other political opponent of his is in charge.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, I hear you.
We need to decouple. We don't have to go to war with Israel, although I wouldn't be against it, but that's not gonna happen. I'd like to decouple. They are not our allies. Decouple, let's separate. No more money for you. No more aiding and abetting your war crimes. No more bribing Egypt so they play nice with you. Decouple, that's what I want. And then Israel can do whatever they want with their regime, but I want nothing to do with them. That's what I want. That's the correct answer. Go ahead, Cenk.
But in the old days, Laura Loomer would have spread that propaganda and Steve Bannon would have joined along, right? Now, Steve Bannon is saying regime change in Jerusalem. And we never signed off on the Greater Israel Project. That to me is the most important thing he said, because finally we're talking about Greater Israel. And that's what the Israelis talk about nonstop. They talk about how they're gonna take Judea and Samaria, West Bank, Gaza Strip, and they're gonna take southern Lebanon and western Syria and all these places. And they barely pretend it's self-defense in Israel. They love taking Arab land and they think that it's theirs, that God promised it to them and that America owes them that land acquisition and that empire that they want to create. And here's Steve Bannon, of all people on planet Earth, going, wait, when did we promise you an empire that we had to pay for? So the fact that he's telling his audience that and basically shutting Laura Loomer up is a beautiful thing. I agree with you, Steve Bannon should never be trusted, and him and Stephen Miller are the two guys who are most in favor of authoritarian government, and I can't stand it. But that's part of my point, that even one of the most toxic people on earth is saying Israel's too toxic for me. Netanyahu's too toxic for me. In fact, we got to pull up on it real quick on TYT.com. We asked you what you think about Bannon's comments. One, I agree, we should try to force him to step down. Two, it's not our business, but we should stop funding them. Three, it's not our business, let them run their own government. Four, Netanyahu is right. I don't know if anybody's gonna say Netanyahu is right, but I say defund them. I agree with you, decouple. We don't have to attack, we don't have to do anything. I want Israel to be a grown-up country. Stop attacking all your neighbors. You're responsible for your own war crimes and your own wars. You have nukes, you have Iron Dome, you have an amazing military. You don't need any more of our money. Stop attacking everyone, otherwise they're gonna attack you back and we're not gonna protect you. Oh no, but you have to protect us. No, we don't. You shouldn't start those wars. If someone starts a war, which Israel has done repeatedly, including in 1967 when they took the land in the first place, then we have no responsibility towards you at all.
At all, at all. In fact, you owe us.
Yeah, you do.
Pay us back.
Yeah.
All that money that you use for atrocities and land theft. Okay, no, I loathe the fact that we have any relationship with Israel. Okay, it's an embarrassment to this country.
They should give us the 300 billion back before we ask for the 8 trillion back. Because we fought all their wars for them. Iraq was their #1 enemy. Iraq was against Al-Qaeda, was not our enemy at all. At all. Saddam Hussein was a bad guy, but he was a bad guy towards Israel and against Al-Qaeda. They made us fight that war. One of the top neocons was Netanyahu. They totally control our government. More than, look, as much as I'm heartbroken about the genocide and it's at maximum level, right? I can't stand that they've ripped away our sovereignty from us even more.
100%.
Like the fact that we don't run our own government when we're supposed to be a democracy and instead the Laura Loomers of the world browbeat everyone, cancel anyone who criticizes Israel. You're an anti-Semite, you're gonna be canceled and your life is gonna be ruined. And then, by the way, we have no control, but if you criticize Israel, you're gonna be fired and your life is going to be absolutely shattered, but no control. But what do you mean no control? We're gonna pay 90% of Congress, they're gonna vote with us 100% of the time, but you're not allowed to say control. No, I am allowed to say it. I'm an American. I don't agree to Israeli occupation of my government, okay? Yes, it is occupied. And those Congress people, by the way, the American Congress people who sell out our country just to get paid by Israeli lobby,
yeah, they're
worse than the Israeli government.
Of course.
Because they're betraying us.
Yeah, they should be tried for treason. They're traitors to this country, and I mean that. All right, final video we'll go to, because Laura Loomer says, no, come on, you think Israel is manipulating and controlling our government? That's crazy. There's a different country that has way more influence.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't say that people can't be critical of Israel, but I don't ever see any of the people that focus all of their efforts on criticizing Israel. I wish that they would criticize Qatar as well. My point is that if you're going to criticize Israeli influence in American politics, talk about the Qatari lobby, because the Qatari lobby has substantially way more influence on our American politics, Steve, and they spend way more money, they own way more real estate, and they're giving way more political favors to American politicians than the Israelis. The Qataris have the type of money that people dream that Jews have.
I don't know if they have more influence.
I'm not going to, but I've never wanted to utter the R word more than this very moment. Go ahead, Cenk.
Yeah, look,
both of them, by the way.
Qatar has way too much influence. They got Trump a $400 million jet, right? UAE funneled $2 billion to Trump's organizations, which he makes about $80 million a year.
What's the influence, Cenk? Okay, sure, yeah, they gave him goodies, but like, what's the influence? Okay, how are they effing us in the ass the way Israel is?
No, I got you. I'm pointing out there's a lot of different countries that try to influence our politicians in different ways. They're mainly targeting Trump, right? UAE, Qatar, etc. But Israel has given money to 90% of Congress, and that 90% votes with Israel 100% of the time. So they totally own our Congress. It's not even close. No one takes money from the Qatari lobby in Congress, as far as I know. If you have names, no problem. I'd be against that 100%, okay? So this idea that Qatar, this tiny little country, is actually more powerful than Israel, which has given hundreds of billions of dollars to our politicians, bribed almost all of them, controls our media almost completely.
Yeah.
That Qatar has more influence than Israel? You got to be out of your mind to say that.
Yeah, we're not buying or believing your deflections and your distractions, bitch. Okay, it's not going to work.
Period.
I tweeted to Ben Shapiro. I said, I've never seen anything on the Daily Wire that's actually critical of Israel. And he quote tweets me. And at this time, I have 1,000 followers on Twitter. I don't know, I probably got 100 likes on this tweet. It wasn't a viral tweet. He quote tweets me and says, to accuse a Jew of dual loyalty is the surest sign of anti-Semitism.
But the second you're like, well, actually, it's the Jews. First of all, it's against my Christian faith. Like, I just don't believe that, and I never will, period. And second, then it becomes a way to discredit. That's when I was like, this guy's a fed. I'm sorry I called you gay, by the way. But I think I'm just too old or something. I'm like, why is anyone married?
Okay, we're gonna get to that last part with Tucker Carlson calling Nick Fuentes gay in just a moment. But first, I actually want to get to the more substantive parts of their discussion because I thought it was important for Tucker to talk about what he disagrees with Nick Fuentes on, because the fact of the matter is they might agree in regard to the undue influence that Israel has over our political system and our government. But I do think that there is a pretty significant distinction between how Tucker Carlson talks about Israel versus how Nick Fuentes, at least historically, has talked about Israel. So with that in mind, why don't we get to the first area of disagreement that they get into? And I want to get your thoughts right after, Cenk.
My Christian faith tells me that there's no such thing as blood guilt. And virtue or sin is not inherited. It's not a feature of DNA. So every person must be assessed individually as God assesses each person individually. And that's like a foundational view. So I always thought it's great to criticize and it's question like our relationship with Israel because it's insane and it hurts us. We get nothing out of it. I completely agree with you there. But the second you're like, well, actually, it's the Jews. First of all, it's against my Christian faith. Like, I just don't believe that and I never will, period. And second, then it becomes a way to discredit. That's when I was like, this guy's a Fed. What I do think is bad, just objectively bad and destructive is the all Jews are guilty or all anybody is guilty of anything. Because that's just like not true. And we don't believe that as Christians. But I also think there's like a true, not just principle, but like spiritual reality that we have to defend, which is God created every person as an individual, not as a group. No woman gave birth to a community.
You know, aside from kind of shrouding it in religion and religious doctrine, in terms of my own values and morals, I totally agree with Tucker Carlson on this, right? I don't judge Jewish people as a group. When we're being critical of Israel, we are being critical of specific people and a specific ideology, an expansionist ideology that has led to so much pain, so much suffering, so much destruction and land theft in the Middle East. That is not inherent in a Jewish person, right? And so to blame all Jews or to engage in anti-Semitism, in my opinion, is not only gross, but it's nonsensical. So basically what you see Tucker Carlson doing there is kind of like differentiating the way he handles this issue from how he believes Nick Fuentes has talked about this issue. So we're gonna get the response from Fuentes in just a second because he did defend himself. But before we do, Cenk, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, so the only people that, well, that's actually not true. Fuentes is one of the people. The two sets of people, and Tucker has said this before too. There's the Fuentes crowd that says the Jews are the responsible. At least historically, that's what he said. And then there's the pro-Israel crowd that says, no, Israel equals Jews, Jews equal Israel. The people criticizing Israel, the great majority of us, never say Jews because we don't mean Jews. And in fact, a lot of us are Jewish Americans, right? So why would we want to attack our own who are in favor of peace and decency, trying to stop a genocide, etc.? So we don't think like the bigots do. But a lot of the pro-Israel crowd, you have to remember, are deeply bigoted against Muslims. And they think it's okay to kill Muslims, it's no big deal. In fact, we should smear Muslims so it makes it easier for America to give us money to kill Muslims. So they assume everyone is as deeply hateful as they are. And then so they say, okay, so when you say you're criticizing Israel, that means you're criticizing Jews. No, it doesn't mean that at all. You just made that up. You said it, none of us said it, right? So that's point one. And Anna, to your point, look, I'm atheist, I'm a humanist. I find the idea that there's a difference between Palestinians and Israelis or any sets of people is so deeply irrational, I can't countenance it. If aliens landed and you said to them, okay, now those Palestinians and Israelis are dramatically different, they'd be like, bloop, 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 does not, they look exactly the same, they act the same, all these things, except for the fact that they hate each other and then all this conflict, and the Israelis are more powerful now. It's a power dynamic. It happens to all humans. It doesn't happen because they're Jewish. In this case, it's happening despite the fact that they're Jewish and have gone through it themselves culturally over and over again where they were the victims. In this case, they are not the victims. So look, this stuff is clear to anyone who isn't trying to smear people on behalf of Israel. All right, so now, last thing on this for now is, if you criticize Tucker for having Fuentes on, I get it, we don't have Fuentes on. He said some really vile things, and so I understand the concern around that, right? But Anna, I read several articles today that never showed that clip or mentioned what you just showed us, right? Every single one of them said Tucker Carlson brought on Fuentes to share his anti-Semitic point of view. But Wait, we just saw with our own eyes. That is nothing but a total lie. And Anna, as you know, this is a lie that they did to me. I had David Duke on to figure out what the hell's going on with this crazy right wing, and I called him an anti-Semite and a bigot and a racist to his face. And the mainstream media said I had David Duke on to share his anti-Semitic views. So James, there is a giant liar in this equation, and it's not the part of the media that constantly gets blamed.
I can't emphasize enough how toxic the trend of quick clips on X or Instagram, just the quick clips, how toxic that really is, because it really does take the context out of the discussion and it paints a narrative that oftentimes isn't even accurate. And so that's why now producing this show is almost a Herculean task, because I'm not going to rely on a few clips I found on X. I want to watch the whole conversation and get a more holistic, perception of what the conversation was and what actually went down. So whatever, putting that aside for a second.
I'm just gonna add real quick, Anna. It's because almost all of media is lying. So then we all have to fact check every single thing that anyone else has ever said. And like in the old days, you thought New York Times at least wasn't lying. No, they're giant liars.
You can't, look, the buck has to stop with you if you're in the media. And we're overwhelmed. There's so much to do every day. And so I understand people relying on these shortcuts, just relying on the clips that like Aaron Rupar clipped out or some other rando on X. But you can't do that. You need to have the fuller context and really understand how the conversation went down. So you just heard Tucker's views and what his values are. Now, Nick Fuentes is going to defend himself. Let's hear what he has to say.
Not to be that guy and say that thing, but like, my best friend is a Jewish person. Clearly, the state of Israel and the neocons are deeply motivated by that ethnic identity, and their allegiance to Israel proceeds from that because of their unique heritage and story, which is that they're a stateless people. They're unassimilable. They resist assimilation for thousands of years, and I think that's a good thing. And now they have this territory in Israel. There's a deep religious affection for the state. It's bound up in their identity, the story of the Exodus from Egypt, the promise of the land, all these things. For the international Jewish community, they're extremely organized, and many of them are critical of Israel or Israel's current government or the project of Israel. But I guess what they have in common, unlike, let's say, like Singapore, for example, is that they have this international community across borders, extremely organized, that is putting the interests of themselves before the interests of their home country. And there's no other country that has a similar arrangement like that.
Okay, but to say that it's all like it's inherent in all Jews, like all Jews sign on to what's happening right now in Gaza, like it's just not true. It's literally not true. The most vocal critics of what Israel is doing right now happen to be Jewish. Okay, I mean, come on. You have Dave Smith, Katie Halper, Glenn Greenwald. The list goes on and on and on. There's so many.
Ben Cohen.
Robert Greenwald. Exactly. There are so many. And so, look, whenever you start making judgments about groups simply based on their heritage or their racial identity or what, you lose me entirely. Because I think it is important to judge people as individuals as opposed to a collective, right? A collective that is based on immutable characteristics. And so I disagree with how Nick Fuentes comments on this issue because he seems to have difficulty differentiating from people who have bought into an expansionist policy in the Middle East versus just Jews who criticize it, who are not co-signing onto it at all.
Yeah. So look, this is a topic where even having an intellectual conversation is career threatening. right?
It's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's totally uncomfortable.
Right. So let's, but I'm going to do it anyway. So first of all, in terms of genetics, there's no difference between us. There's so much more variability within any race or religion than there is between the different races and religions. So I don't want to get too deep into the science of that, but to make an assumption based on someone's race or religion in terms of their hardware, their genetics, is just preposterous, comically ignorant, okay? So now, is there such a thing as culture that also affects us? Yes. Are there different forms of the culture? Yes. Are there positives and negatives within every culture? Yes, right? And I've talked about my own culture, Turkish culture originally, et cetera, and some of the wonderful upsides and some of the significant downsides, right? Now, you can say that about your own culture, you can say that about a lot of different cultures, but there's some cultures, if you say it about it, then you're gonna be driven from public life and you're all these terrible names and you're canceled, et cetera, right? So now in the case of Jewish culture, I think, and I've said this a million times on this show, it has these beautiful parts to it. And I grew up in a town that was about half Jewish. And so I grew up in that culture and I loved it. You challenge the rabbi, you challenge authority, you stand up for the powerless. That's why the Jewish Americans were a huge part of the civil rights movement. I can go on and on. Is there a part of the culture that says we are perpetual victims? Yes. Is that because they have been perpetual victims throughout history? Yes. But is there a problem within that strand? My real opinion is, yeah, there is a problem, which is if you teach all your kids that the whole world hates you and you should be super protective of your people, and you should, and even preemptively so, because the whole world is gonna attack you at any moment and your life is constantly in danger. I think that is not a positive thing to teach kids. Now, it's easy for me to say, I didn't grow up as someone who was Jewish, and they had all the pogroms and the Holocaust, et cetera. So I get it, I get the PTSD from all of that stuff. So now the last part of culture, Anna, is here we are in America. I don't know how Jewish folks are in Australia and Peru, et cetera, but here in America, there's a huge divide, and we can see it in the polling. And that's younger Jewish Americans and older Jewish Americans. So younger Jewish Americans are at this point more on the side of the Palestinians than they are of Israel. Like I'm generalizing based on the polls that I've seen. But for example, earlier today we talked about how 67% of Jewish voters under the age of 45 are backing Mamdani in the mayoral race in New York. Okay, as an example. So why is there a divide between the older Jewish Americans and the younger ones? Because the older ones are closer to the PTSD of the Holocaust, of being stateless, of all these things that are legitimate concerns for Jewish folks throughout the world and throughout history, right? So they're much more protective of this idea of Israel and, oh my God, Israel, we got everything. They can't see clearly. No, Israel has nukes. Israel has Iron Dome. Israel has a bigger and more effective military than the entire Middle East combined. So it's a grown-up country now. Whereas younger Jewish Americans grew up as Americans. And so they were partly brainwashed. All cultures brainwashed. I was brainwashed as a Turk growing up. And by the way, against the Armenian genocide never happened. They were hiding behind their civilians. We were just moving them, et cetera. So this is not specific to Jews at all. Right? So when he generalizes about the Jews, it's absurd. It's absurd on genetic grounds, on demographic grounds, age, et cetera. But are there some folks in America that love Israel and love Israel more than they love this country and are more obsessed about it and spend tons of money on it and try to cancel people and fire anyone who would criticize Israel? Of course there are. If you say there aren't, you're definitely lying, and you have to look into why you're lying, right? So I don't agree with Fuentes. He's getting it wrong in an important way. But Tucker didn't agree with any of that.
No, he didn't. In fact, he also told Fuentes that anti-Semitism is actually very convenient for the bad faith actors who are seeking to essentially justify anything and everything that Israel is carrying out. So let's just hear how Fuentes responded to that.
I would just say I disagree. I mean, because you said the other day, they like me. I don't know what you're talking about when you say that, because
I don't know.
Let me just kind of rebut that.
Well, by the way, I'm not saying you have anything to do with this. I'm just saying I've noticed the phenomenon.
Totally, and I just reject that because they have been messing with me for my entire adult life. I mean,
the ADL.
The ADL got me banned on YouTube. The SPLC posted my house on their website. I mean, as far as the Jews are concerned, I think that, like I said, you cannot actually divorce Israel and the neocons and all those things that you talk about from Jewishness, ethnicity, religion, identity.
Yeah, I'm 100% on Tucker's side. And by the way, for those who are critical of the expansionist project that's currently being carried out by Israel, and you are justified in being critical about that. It is not based on someone's immutable characteristics. It's not based on people's identity as Jewish people. It has everything to do with an ideology that is being carried out by a government. Okay, that, by the way, is not just supported by Jewish individuals within Israel and maybe globally, but also, more importantly, evangelicals as well. So it's not about an identity, it's about an ideology. And that's what's important to me, because there's no one in the world who's gonna convince me to have hatred in my heart for Jewish people or Black people or gay people. For me, the ideology and the actions that individuals carry out is way more important to focus on. And what I can't stand is that people who understand that distinction and do not have malice or hatred in their hearts end up getting lumped together with those who do have malice and hatred in their hearts. And that was the point that Tucker Carlson was trying to make there.
Yeah, I gotta say the last two things here. First, it makes no sense to say the Jews or Jewishness, as Fuentes is saying. So wait, Dave Smith and Ben Shapiro disagree 100%. So which one represents the Jews? It just, you can't make sense out of that, right? And as we've said a million times on the show, look, we've got friends, family that are Jewish, and Mossad never called them, IDF never called them. They're physics professors. They're doing physics. They're not doing anything else. So like that, all of that is absurd. Now, on the other hand, with the Ben Shapiros of the world, he says, oh, it's a dual loyalty trope, saying that we're loyal to Israel, and this has been going on for all of eternity. Israel started in 1948. How could it have been going on for eternity? So I feel like sometimes they're planting the pro-Israel guys are planting these so-called tropes around so that anything triggers them, and then you're canceled forever for criticizing Israel in a super convenient way. And they say the dual loyalty thing, and then they say Mamdani is actually loyal to jihadi terrorists and not America. Wait, isn't that the dual loyalty trope? And in a much more vicious and bigoted way, and based on absolutely nothing. So apparently you don't mind the dual loyalty trope. You just mind if anyone criticizes Israel, you like that you get to use that newfound trope to criticize them. So guys, this is super simple. The only people who don't get it are the neo-Nazis and the dumbass mainstream media that work for Israel, okay? Jews and Israel are not the same thing. We love Jewish Americans, they're our brothers and sisters, and we always protect them. And Israel is a foreign government that is committing a genocide, and we've got to get them to stop. Easy, I solved it.
I tweeted to Ben Shapiro. I said, I've never seen anything on the Daily Wire that's actually critical of Israel. And he quote tweets me. And at this time, I have 1,000 followers on Twitter. I don't know, I probably got 100 likes on this tweet. It wasn't a viral tweet. He quote tweets me and says, to accuse a Jew of dual loyalty is the surest sign of anti-Semitism.
But the second you're like, well, actually, it's the Jews. First of all, it's against my Christian faith. Like, I just don't believe that, and I never will, period. And second, then it becomes a way to discredit. That's when I was like, this guy's a Fed.
Well, as you just saw from that video, Tucker Carlson had a sit-down interview with Nick Fuentes, who's obviously a very controversial figure. And I was happy to see that they had a back and forth about their differences on how they discuss Israel and what's being carried out in Gaza. I am certainly more in agreement with Tucker Carlson. I do not blame the Jews, but I do blame a certain ideology and a certain government that has carried out the atrocities that we've seen in the Middle East, not just during this genocide in Gaza, but over the last several decades. That you have Nick Fuentes, and he thinks that there's an organized Jewry that is essentially leading to the situation that we're seeing right now on the ground in Gaza. Again, I agree more with Tucker Carlson. I'm just recounting that part of the discussion in case you missed our coverage of it, because we talked about that yesterday. But there were other parts of their conversation that I thought were worthy of delving into. I wanted to share with you, including this really interesting experience that Nick Fuentes allegedly had with the Daily Wire and Ben Shapiro. So this is all taking place when Nick Fuentes is still in high school. He's like around 18 years old. He's a curious person, he's a self-identified libertarian. He debates someone, and apparently that debate he performed really well in. And then he gets approached by someone who I'm actually familiar with. Her name is Cassie Dillon, who works over at the Daily Wire. She was impressed, and then there was like this effort to essentially recruit Nick Fuentes. Now, there's more to the story, and I wanna let Fuentes set it up for you, so let's take a look.
Barack Obama in the lame duck period, so the Democrats lost the election, he's on his way out. There's a resolution in the Security Council condemning the settlements in the West Bank in Israel. And typically the US delegation will veto those resolutions condemning Israel. Well, Obama's on his way out, he's got nothing to lose. So the US delegation abstains from the resolution and it passes. And Fox News and all the pro-Israel conservatives are calling him an anti-Semite. They're saying he hates Jews, he's an anti-Semite, he hates Israel. I said, how is it anti-Semitic to just be consistent on our US foreign policy? I tweeted about it. I tweeted to Ben Shapiro. I said, I've never seen anything on the Daily Wire that's actually critical of Israel. And he quote tweets me. And at this time, I have 1,000 followers on Twitter. I don't know, I probably got 100 likes on this tweet. It wasn't a viral tweet. He quote tweets me and says, to accuse a Jew of dual loyalty is the surest sign of anti-Semitism.
How is that? First of all, dual loyalty exists. I said it exists. There are Americans in this country right now, self-identified American Jews, who seem to be far more concerned with the well-being of a foreign country, and that foreign country is Israel, as opposed to the well-being of this country. Ben Shapiro is a fiscal conservative who's very concerned about our entitlement programs like Social Security, programs that we pay into as Americans, so we can maybe one day retire and not be destitute. He thinks that we spend too much money on that program and healthcare and all that. But when it comes to bribing Egypt to play nice with Israel, money well spent. $4 billion a year to Israel, money well spent. $30 billion since October 7th to help Israel commit its atrocities in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, money well spent. Our tax dollars working for us, the American people, what a waste. We're in debt, we're in debt. I'm not gonna believe a single politician or pundit in this country, left or right, when they say they are concerned about our debt as they just funnel more and more of our resources to a foreign country. Dual loyalty exists, and that's not anti-Semitism. It's a fact and it's reality. Never thought I would see the day where I would, defend Nick Fuentes over the ridiculous smears of Ben Shapiro. Israel effed up big time by carrying out what they've been carrying out over the last 2 years. Because for the first time in my lifetime, I'm seeing Americans ask questions and actually effectively push back against these talking points that had silenced people previously. But there is evidence of dual loyalty, and there's nothing anti-Semitic to call it out. Now let's watch Fuentes explain how he actually used to have a very good relationship with the folks over at the Daily Wire, and then he started asking what they referred to as the wrong questions.
I was friends with a lot of the Daily Wire writers, not just Cassie Dillon, but many of them were Jewish. And I would ask them point blank. I would say, so why do we give Israel all this money? $3.8 billion per year? What is that for? And they would say, well, there's a really good answer for that, but you're asking it in the wrong way. You're asking it in an anti-Semitic way. I'd say, I'm asking for the proof. What's the argument there? And so first it was the sort of, hey man, could you kind of tone it down? Maybe just don't bring that up so much. But I was persistent because at this time I was genuinely inquisitive. I wanted to know, is there an actual reason? And I was actually expecting that there was a really good reason for all of it. And the more that I read, the more that I dug into the subject, the more I found out there's a lot of these neocon Jewish types behind the Iraq war. There's the foreign aid complex, which is really unique. There's AIPAC, which is this intense foreign lobby where it's bipartisan. It seems to be the only thing that the parties can agree on. And so it just made me burn more with curiosity. So I just kept asking them. And eventually they said, you know what? We're not going to talk to you anymore.
Oh, it's dangerous. It's dangerous to ask those questions. Okay, this is a side note, and I know it's going to take away from the commentary a little bit, but you got the sniffles, bro. You got to do something about the sniffles. Okay, it was really distracting, but putting that aside, no, he was asking the right questions. In fact, I wish more Americans asked those questions. And the way that they tried to bury him for asking those questions is super sus. Why? What's wrong with asking, why is it that we fund Israel to the tune of $4 billion every year? And then of course, there's always like supplemental funding that pops up out of nowhere. Like the random $1 billion in extra funding that AOC allegedly didn't want to vote in favor of. Then she voted present and then cried on the House floor and embarrassed progressives in this country with how pathetic she is. Sorry, I know that's a harsh thing to say. I'm supposed to be very rah-rah about the progressives in Congress, except when push comes to shove, they do a lot of unprogressive things, like provide Israel with an additional $1 billion in funding when we're already giving them $4 billion a year in military aid. He didn't ask the wrong questions. The problem is he asked the right questions in the wrong environment. In an environment where the dual loyalty certainly does exist. And no one's gonna stop me from saying that, because it's the truth. It's the truth. Let's pivot to a more amusing part of the discussion. Because Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes had a bit of a tiff earlier this year. They both accused each other of being feds. It was hilarious. And look, Tucker Carlson also said that, Nick Fuentes is like a gay kid living in his parents' basement, whatever. And so that really upset Nick Fuentes. He did a whole broadcast about it. It blew up and everyone was like waiting for this moment where they would, hash it out. And they did. So Carlson repeatedly urged Fuentes to let go of his grudges against his perceived enemies. And that led to the two of them basically focusing on their recent feud. So let's watch the clip and then we'll explain the backstory a little more.
Look, Tucker, that's why I'm sitting here,
Right.
I mean, because we had a contentious dialogue.
Well, I
for a
thought you
long
were
time.
a Fed. I
thought you were a Fed.
I was a Fed.
Yeah.
I'm not a Fed. But whatever, I don't care what people
Yeah,
think.
we showed each other a badge as we know well.
No, but I thought you were a Fed because I was like, why not? It's not cucking to say you're not talking about all Jews when you oppose a foreign policy position. It's not. There's nothing liberal about that. It's just true. That's the Christian position, okay? And two, why are you attacking like the best people and not the worst people?
Well, yeah, I mean, again, he disavowed me for my views on Israel and said I talk too much about white people and Christianity. And to me, that's like a sincere ideological disagreement.
I get it.
Okay, so the guy that they're talking about is Joe Kent. That's who they were feuding about. So he's a Republican who ran for the House in Washington. In Washington's 2022 and 2024 elections. He did lose both times. And according to Fuentes, many years ago, Fuentes privately gave Kent the support of both himself and his organization's political resources on the condition that Kent would never publicly disavow Fuentes, which I think is a ridiculous ask. You never know what the future holds. What if Fuentes does something terrible? I think Kent should be allowed to disavow him, right? But later, Kent did just that after Marjorie Greene attended Fuentes' conference back in 2022. Okay, look, I don't care about any of this stuff. Like, here's what I do care about. The reason why Tucker thought that Nick Fuentes was a Fed is because when you have critics of Israel specifically blaming the Jews and spewing anti-Semitic rhetoric, those of us who don't think it's the Jews and instead specifically blame a government and those who adhere to a certain ideology, we get lumped in with the likes of Nick Fuentes or whoever says disgusting anti-Semitic things about Jews, and that discredits us. And so many think that figures like that are feds meant to intentionally discredit those who have legitimate criticism about Israel. So that's why Tucker Carlson thought he was a Fed. Now, is he a Fed? No, I don't think he's a Fed. I think he's I think he got his start very young. I think he's on the record saying a lot of terrible things. I think he's trying to be, or was trying to be, some sort of edgelord. And in a lot of ways, that destroyed his reputation. When in reality, if he didn't feed into that gross, hateful rhetoric, and not just about Jews, about women, about all sorts of people, he's actually not a dumb guy. He makes cogent arguments. He seems to be well read. And he would be far more influential if he didn't cave into or give into that rhetoric. Now it's gonna haunt him for the rest of his life. And this is why, look, if you have kids, they're teenagers, they're online, just sit down and talk to them about, hey, everything you say will exist forever and it will haunt you for the rest of your life. So yeah, look, people are upset that Tucker Carlson had a sit down interview with Nick Fuentes because of the statements he has made on the record. I don't think anyone should dictate who anyone should or shouldn't be allowed to talk to. But I also understand where the rage and fury is coming from, because Nick Fuentes has definitely offended a lot of people by saying some pretty disgusting things. I think people can be redeemed, but there needs to be an apology. There needs to be an acknowledgement. Hey, I was a moron, I grew, I changed, I matured. I personally haven't seen that. But I do think that having these types of conversations are still worth it, because we get a little bit of insight into not only who Fuentes is, but the experiences he had with conservative organizations trying to groom him for their own purposes, and then rejecting him and attempting to bury him the second he asks questions that they deem to be inappropriate, which actually happened to be very appropriate. So I don't know what to make about Nick Fuentes. What I do know is, regardless of how much you want him to go away, he's not going away. This guy had 300,000 people watching one of his live streams recently. He's blowing up. And if you want to know why he's blowing up, look no further than our government's fealty to a foreign government that's currently carrying out atrocities with our resources. If you think my commentary about what Israel has been up to in the Middle East is what is leading to anti-Semitism in the country, how about maybe consider the actions of the Israeli government? Because believe it or not, people around the world do not rejoice in the endless imagery of children with their limbs blown off, or parents picking up their children's body parts and putting them in plastic bags in Gaza. People see that and they get angry.